Hello and welcome to The Found Cause, where we found our cause and serve the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm the Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right, your left is
Sebastian, the bookkeeper.
Hey Sebastian, we have no intro. We should have planned an intro. My gosh, okay. What you didn't see off camera is we just had a 1 hour long argument on whether or not ancient people kept donkeys under their houses in the middle of the city. How do we get there? Well, title of the episode is something about Christmas. Christmas being a controversy, I haven't figured it out yet. But we were talking about Jesus being born in a manger. And there's honestly, as much like tradition as there is around there being no room in the inn and all that, I was just looking up the actual quote from Luke, which is the only one that talks about being no room for the inn. And it just says that he was born in a manger because there was no guest room for him. And once again reiterates that the shepherds came to see him because the angel said that they would find a baby lying in a manger, which really tells you very little. It doesn't say like there was a sheep and a donkey there. It doesn't say that it was like off a distance. It doesn't even have a conversation with the inn owner. There's nothing like that. So Sebastian was telling me, maybe you want to say it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You're going to have to summarize our hour-long discussion. Yes. Yeah, I can do it. That in those houses in the ancient world, you would be 2 or 3 stories plus roof. You would keep the animals in the first floor, and then outside there will be stairs that lead up to the second floor. And then that's where people would hang out and eat. And then sometimes they would sleep on the roof. We have regulations from the Old Testament that says, if the roof falls and it was considered a crime in the law. I'm forgetting exactly the quote right now from the Old Testament, but that's the logic behind it. So with that in mind, with that setup of the house, because the house that was for rent, so to say, like an Airbnb, it was packed. Mary and Joseph could not find a room there or space to stay, so then they would have stayed. It's my argument. They would have stayed at the bottom in the first floor with the animals,
which is not the typical thing you see in dioramas or whatever, little nativity sets. So that's fine. I don't really have a problem with that. The argument went into like, if you're packed downtown, right? So it's like wall-to-wall houses. There's no yards or anything like that. Do you still keep animals underneath on the first floor? And Sebastian is telling me on good authority that they do or they did. And I'm like, there's no way. You don't have a little yard for it? Like, if you don't have a little yard for your goat or whatever, how long can you keep it under your house at all times? Like, no little yard? And like the paved streets of Jerusalem? I don't know. So I'm probably wrong because I didn't do any research. Just my intuition telling me these things. So in any case, that's not really the topic of the episode. In fact, let's not ever talk about that again. This is an episode on Christmas. So if you're not familiar, and in fact, we were planning this episode and a user commented somewhere on one of our things asking for this episode. It is a more often talked about topic than you'd think, or at least than I would think, because I never really pay any attention or mind to whether or not we celebrate Christmas. We just do, and I think there's bad ways to celebrate Christmas and good ways to celebrate Christmas. But there are many factions and histories behind Christmas, the celebration of Christmas, people who have done it terribly, people who have opposed the celebration of Christmas. So the first question of the night, Sebastian, is why are we even talking about Christmas? Because we're not like talking about Santa Claus or other things like that. We're really talking about the hate or love of Christmas. Who hates Christmas? Like, why are we talking about this? Why is it even a controversy? Who hates Christmas? What groups of people?
I can think of atheists. Anything that reminds them of Jesus.
Yeah, okay. People that hate God, yes. Hindus and others, yeah.
And then people who are, at least in Peru and other countries, they're grouped off together with Protestants, like Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, yes. That Chilean teacher told me that they were evangelicals.
Oh, yeah, everywhere.
Mormons. You like describe Mormons. She's like, yeah, the evangelicals. Oh, not me.
Painful. Yes. But those would be big groups of people, I would say, atheists primarily, and also Jehovah's Witnesses. So,
and it's not just them. So, I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses notoriously do not celebrate Christmas. I think there's some other groups that don't celebrate. I could be wrong. I don't think Seventh-day Adventists celebrate Christmas either. They're against it. But it's not just them. There are also like weird fundamental, and I'm using fundamental derogatory. Being fundamental Christian is sometimes very good, but often it can be like just weird rules, like weird legalism. So I'm using it as a stand-in. There are weird legalists that also are against Christmas, but usually it's like house by house. Like, it's not really a church-wide thing, except for Jehovah's Witnesses and obviously people that hate God normally. Yes. But surprisingly, a big revered group in the United States, the Puritans, also were pretty anti-Christmas. They weren't they didn't deny Christmas. They weren't like, if you recognize that Christmas is a thing, we stone you. But they were very anti-celebration in general, because they had seen excesses of celebration and feared the excesses of celebrating, because sometimes celebration turns into like orgies or vandalism or drunkenness or like weird gender role reversals, which is apparently something that was happening at the time of the Pilgrims back in England and other things like that. So they were acutely aware of the problems with excesses in celebration, and so they were acutely not in favor of doing that kind of thing on Christmas. So there's a famous story of William Bradford, who's the first governor of Massachusetts, Puritan. There were non-Puritans and Puritans alike in Massachusetts, majority being Puritans, and William Bradford was obviously in charge of the whole expedition, and he was a Puritan. There were non-Puritans who wouldn't go out to work. I think the first winter they were there, the second winter or something like that. They wouldn't go out to work on Christmas. And because William Bradford was taking everybody out, they were going out to do some expedition, I think, to cut wood. And he allowed them. They weren't forced to work, but his comment to them was, maybe one day you'll learn better and come to work on Christmas, because they said it was violating their conscience to work on Christmas. And he said, it's just like any other day, we should go work. So there's kind of a vibrant history, at least in the U.S. and across the world, of similar kinds of movements where they don't like the excesses of celebrations of Christmas. So I would say probably more in the U.S. than any other has this kind of anti-Christmas mood been promoted. But of course, we know today the U.S. is the number one exporter of like Christmas to the whole world, right? We're super commercial about it. We drive sales. Like 50% of I work for a marketing company, and 50% of some of my clients' sales are all done on Christmas. And we've exported that to large portions of the world to celebrate Christmas, that style of commercial Christmas. So kind of, we're very Christmas sensitive here in the U.S. That's what I'll say. So there are groups, like you said, Sebastian, that have serious problems with Christmas. An objection that I hear often from atheists, and this piggyback, I don't know who said it first, but there's this argument out there that Christmas is pagan, that the Catholic Church put it in to replace some pagan holiday, and therefore when we celebrate Christmas, we're actually celebrating a pagan holiday, or we're somehow capitulating to the Catholics or something like that, and that is why we shouldn't. That's what I hear from Seventh-day Adventists. I'm pretty sure they don't either, but maybe I'm wrong. Definitely Jehovah's Witnesses, and again, sometimes fringe, alternative Christians here, but also atheists as well. Do you have a response for that, or maybe the history of Christmas or something like that? Where did it come from? Is it a pagan holiday? What's up?
Yeah, so the origin of the holiday, supposedly celebrated on the 25th, it was instigated by Emperor Aurelian in the 200s, and it's the day of the Sol Invictus, Invincible Sun, Unconquered Sun. It wasn't really that celebrated.
Now this is a pagan emperor too.
Yes,
so
this is
pagan
Aurelian.
holiday.
Yes, the sun. Yes, the sun god. So I think that's pretty pagan.
But what should be noted, just in case anybody's a history buff, Aurelian came after the birth of Christ.
Yes.
And Christians were a big deal in the Roman Empire at the time. He was pagan, so he's anti-Christian. If there was a celebration happening around the 25th is what we keep it as, and what they kind of did back in the olden days, but I think it's actually supposed to be the solstice. It's just it wasn't quite as accurate. We recognize the winter solstice on the 21st of December. So I don't know that if Christians missed it and put it on the 25th, or if those like Aurelian tried to cover up the Christian holiday that already existed by putting on the 25th, like a previously winter solstice party, like Saturnalia was a common.
I was going to touch on that. Yeah.
Pre-Aurelian, that was a Roman holiday. That was like harvest, sex fest, like any good pagan holiday would be.
Yes.
If they moved it to the 25th, just a little bit afterwards, so that it's still close enough to the solstice that it's the same thing. Meaning, just because Aurelian made a celebration on the 25th, it may have been actually influenced by a Christian celebration. So it's not like what came first, the chicken or the egg here. It might have been the Christian celebration.
Yes. What I can tell you, though, is that Easter was celebrated early on. It was celebrated the same time of Passover was turned into remembrance of Jesus. So we know that for a fact. What it's a little bit harder to trace is the birth of Christ. We don't really have any official celebration of the birth of church-wide until the time of Constantine. We have an actual Christmas celebration until Constantine. It's 300s.
Yeah, 300 years since Christ. They were celebrating Easter for all that time, but not Christmas necessarily.
Yes, and we know that we're celebrating Easter because there was a huge debate on when should Easter be celebrated, using the Jewish calendar or using the Roman calendar. So that split the church. A great topic to split over, by the way, but to each their own, I suppose.
Yeah, like who cares, right?
Yeah, just celebrate it. Like I should have had that ready, but I'll quote it again later, I'm sure. For whatever you celebrate, do it for the glory of God. Like, don't add weird legalist principles to it. Anyway, you mentioned Saturnalia, which was a weird Roman holiday that ended on the 23rd, actually. So it was a week long. It was a week-long celebration in which people would inverse roles. So slaves would become, obviously, to within a limit, their masters. So obviously, you couldn't abuse your masters, otherwise there would be repercussions.
One of those quirky, fun nights, yes, I guess.
So, and it was pretty wild. People would not go to work afterwards because they were so intoxicated, so hungover. There were orgies too. Mm-hmm. It was a mess in the city, especially in the city of Rome. So it was a wild mess. So some people really didn't like it because you can imagine it was pretty messy and disgusting sometimes. And
I think it had riots too. Like things were burned down sometimes in Saturnalia weeks.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Purge. It's kind of what it strikes me as. Like supposedly the common people of Rome really liked that kind of celebration, and you'll see that in common across even post-Rome, like just in Christian nations. Mm-hmm. People still like to get rowdy, like sin is still a temptation, whatever age you're in. So this like weird want to do a purge night, essentially. If you've ever seen the horror movie commercials about the purge, where you get one legal night to murder everybody in the United States, some movie concept. Saturnalia is kind of like that. Like anything goes, but only for a week. And,
Yes, not just a day, but for a week. So imagine that. Imagine the chaos and the looting and all the...
Well, I mean, things were still illegal, but yes.
But there was looting. There were... People would be so drunk they would loot houses. Anyway, so it was my point. It was a mess. The Puritans, they hated that because in the Middle Ages and also later on in England, people would still do that.
But they do it for Christmas.
For Christmas, yes. So that's, I would say, compartmentalize that one for now. For the time being, I'm going to focus on the Christmas itself. I would hold, actually, that people would have had the notion that Jesus was born in December, even before all these pagan holidays were invented by Aurelian. There was a common understanding or thought or tradition that Jesus was conceived in March. So then they would just add 9 months to it, and then he was born in December. That's tradition. We don't have anything in the Bible that says Jesus was born this day, he was conceived this day. We don't have that. So it was all simply reasoning or tradition from the church fathers. Again, we have to take that with a grain of salt, because Irenaeus believed that Jesus lived until he was 50 years old. So
and what's interesting, so I've heard arguments from Christians and especially atheists that Jesus probably was actually born in the summer, like in August sometime, because that's when the census would have taken place from Augustus. But I think what's missing there is that the order might have gone out in August or whatever. I don't really know the details to be honest, but the order might have gone out from Rome in August. But it's perfectly acceptable, I think, to think that the census is actually taking place, like get there by the end of the year kind of thing, right?
Yes, that was also my thought too. Just like how we have so much time to do taxes from January to April, in the ancient world you had to move, and it wasn't as easy to move then as it is now. So usually things took a long time. Think of the councils; they lasted for almost a decade sometimes. A council, to make a decision, you took years to make a decision, because you had to send letters back to your home country, get back from your congregation, get back from bishops, etc. So it took a while. So I think it's fairly reasonable to say that it would have been sent out in late summer, and then they finally have the time in December to get there. So
yeah, which to me tells me so the people who say that it's a pagan holiday that the Catholic Church just made it up, essentially, like nobody's ever celebrated Christmas until finally they had enough of Saturnalia or Solus Invictus Day or whatever it was, and then they said, okay, we're going to make up a holiday to cover it up, and the excuse is going to be we're celebrating Jesus' birth. Yeah, I don't believe it happened that way. There was a Christian tradition, like you're saying. Again, it's not as strong as a tradition as Easter, but there is a Christian tradition, an ancient one, pre-Saturnalia, pre-Solus Invictus, pre the Catholic Church, I should say, pre-Pope, man, running around, that had Christmas being celebrated, and it was celebrated in the December timeframe, in December 25th, which again tells me that, not that we're 100% sure that Jesus is born then, but it's probably more likely that the church tradition is right than some weird estimation by secular scholars today, that he was born in summer or something like that. And we know that it really doesn't have to do with other pagan myths. Like there's all those, we did that episode on, is Jesus a copy of pagan gods or other things, right? Like Mithras or all these different gods. And one of the arguments from the secularists, terrible arguments, is that, all these different cast of characters were born on December 25th, which is, one, it's not even true. It's a straight up lie, because a lot of these people, we don't even know when they were quote unquote born. Second of all, if anything, they're trying to associate it with like that character, that god being associated with the winter solstice, which is not December 25th. It's the 21st. So once again, they're just assuming that the 25th and the 21st are relatively the same, so they connect them together. And then 3, I don't think that the church ever associated Jesus' birth with the winter solstice. Like, I don't think that was ever a thing they were trying to connect.
Right. Because remember what madness happened leading up to that. I would say Saturnalia is very unchristian.
Yeah, so especially the early church, why would they be trying to associate the birth of Jesus with like this kind of notorious celebration of the Roman Empire, right?
Yeah. Something else I want to mention, and also there's some little nice story that I want to touch on, but first, the one time that we have the 25th mentioned for sure by someone we know and love, Augustine. That's
so 400s.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Either late 300s or very early 400s. He criticizes the Donatists, who had a different time they did not celebrate the Epiphany, meaning the wise men showing up to Jesus. They would only celebrate the birth and would not celebrate the Epiphany.
To viewers who don't know, and I'm kind of one that doesn't know, I only know roughly here, in many other countries, just not really the U.S., they celebrate this Three Kings Day is what it's often called, like I think in Europe and other places, where they celebrate the coming of the wise men, and that's kind of where they do their gift exchange. So Christmas is more like Easter is in the U.S., although Easter is messed up in the U.S. too, but more like just the celebration feast time.
Another can of worms.
Church service, right? And then the Three Kings Day happens in like early the first week of January, something like that. And then that's when they give the gifts in honor of the wise men who gave gifts to Jesus. Of course, we don't do that in the U.S. I don't know that there's any state or group of people in the U.S. that does that. That's not like they're not a foreigner, right? Importing that in. But that is a generally common thing to do in South America. Am I wrong?
Yes, and Spain.
In Spain and some other countries in Europe.
In Europe.
So this Epiphany thing is clearly also a Christian tradition, but we don't do it in the U.S. So I think what should be made plain and obvious to anybody is that, one, Christmas is not prescribed in the Bible. So it's not like if you don't celebrate it, you are sinning. And it's not like if you're celebrating it, you are fulfilling some biblical mandate. So, and honestly, same for Easter. So like Sebastian had alluded to, when the church almost split, did split, but then came back together, East and West, on the date of Easter, it's like, you don't even need to celebrate Easter. So you're complaining about the date that somebody does it. That's insane. So I don't think anybody should be offended by somebody choosing not to celebrate Christmas or Easter, for that matter. There could be other things to be worried about somebody who doesn't, because they might hate the church, right? So that's why they don't celebrate Easter, is because they hate the church, and so they're like trying to do their own thing where they only privately worship God and they never go to church services. That's the issue, not the not celebrating of Easter. We do it because it's fun, and I think it's a good way to celebrate. And we'll flesh that out a little bit more after we go through the history. But needless to say, the way you celebrate it, how you celebrate it, what days you celebrate it, they're all just tradition. They're not biblically based.
Right. And also, I would actually argue that it was good, and also Pastor Mike Winger takes this position, that even if later the Catholic Church said, okay, enough of the society is Christian, whatever that entails, I'll leave that to you to discern, we can replace this strange celebration of the Sol Invictus with the birth of Christ. Like, even if they landed on the same day. What he's saying is that it's for the better that even if later on, like, I mean, even after Augustine, they decided to replace it with the Christmas
So
celebration.
you're saying, even though the history seems to point that they didn't really do that,
Yeah.
even if they did, so even if you don't believe us, you think the Catholic Church did actually place it on the 25th so that it would replace Sol Invictus or whatever, whatever pagan holiday you want to put in there, that's good. Like, why would we be upset that they replaced a pagan holiday? Because it seems to be the association, guilt by association, that Jehovah's Witnesses and other atheists and some others that oppose Christmas have against the pagan holiday coinciding with it, is that Christmas essentially is that pagan holiday. Like, it put on a Christmas coat and instead is still that pagan holiday. So we're still worshiping, the sun or Saturn or having orgies and other things like that. But
maybe there's some sad people in the world that do that, but if you go to church, you're not going to see any of that.
And surely you'd think other Christmas or other Christian celebrations, anytime you celebrate anything, you might be celebrating on the day of some unknown pagan holidays, right? Like your birthday. We celebrate birthdays.
Mm-hmm.
I guess Jehovah's Witnesses also don't celebrate birthdays, but most people don't have a problem with birthdays. You're probably somewhere, some god has a celebration on that day, right? So is it tainted because some god also has his celebration on that day? Shouldn't be. And I think it's generally fine to replace an evil thing with a good thing. Christians have a long tradition of taking like bar songs, like old drinking songs, and turning them into Christian songs. A famous one is For Auld Lang Syne. That's that New Year's song. Should old acquaintance be forgot? It's a drinking song. It's an Irish, I think Scottish or something, drinking song. And Christian Church took it and made it All Glory Be to Christ. I don't know, it's kind of an awkward fit in there, but they do it. All glory be to Christ. Anyways, they took a pagan, not good drinking song and made it Christian. I think it's good. I like that song. I like All Glory Be to Christ, and it doesn't make me want to drink. Like, it doesn't hold the same spirit that the old thing it's replacing does. And so therefore, just because the Catholic Church, if they did, and we're not even saying they did, but even if you believe they did, like, who cares? It doesn't taint Christmas just because they replaced Saturnalia / Sol Invictus Day, whatever, with Christmas.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is getting another can of worms. The Christmas tree.
Oh, yeah, there's another thing that people complain about, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like some German thing. Maybe you can explain it better.
Yes. So the story goes that this was attributed to Saint Boniface. Boniface lived in the early 700s. He would have gone to Germany to evangelize the Saxons there, and near Cologne area. I understand it's not quite near Cologne, but I'm just giving you as a reference, a big city in Germany for your purpose, Western Germany. The Tree of Thor was a main worship center for the Saxons there. So he went there. He had this big dramatic moment, kind of like was it Elijah calling fire on the altar? Mm-hmm. It's like, or like Gideon, to be honest, like when he's cutting down the Asher pole. Yeah. It's like, if Thor is real, may he strike me down as I cut down this tree. And then all the Saxons, they scoff at him. It's like, he's gonna smoke you. He's gonna roast you. And then guess what? He chopped off that tree, that big tree. Thor didn't do anything, and then all the Saxons were shocked, saying, "Oh my goodness! He just he chopped down the Yggdrasil. The Yggdrasil, even if you're not familiar with Norse mythology, if you have seen Thor, Marvel movies, they reference the Yggdrasil connecting all the worlds, and then Midgard is the middle world where we're in. Anyway,
so he cuts down some holy tree in Germany. Obviously, Thor does not come because Thor's not real.
Yeah. He builds a nice church from the wood, which is good.
That's a lot of wood came from that tree.
It was a really big tree.
Okay.
A really, really big tree. So made a nice church there, and then the story says that he planted a pine tree where the Yggdrasil, where Thor's tree was there. So, and then hence why we have the pine tree as Christmas tree.
Yeah, and so I've heard other things. Okay, so what I know, the tradition on why we use the pine tree is that the needles represent, because they're evergreen trees, that it represents eternal life in God. And also kind of mixed in with the fact that he was crucified on a cross of wood, and therefore we're like bringing a tree in and kind of remembering that. The curse that's in the Old Testament and the law says that whoever's hung on a tree is cursed, right? And so Jesus took on that curse. So here we are bringing a tree in. It's kind of the symbol of something to do with Christ, right? And then, but I've heard, so that's the defense of why we do the tree today, and we put lights on it because he's the light of the world. I mean, and it looks, obviously we do it because it looks cool,
right?
I think that's kind of the main impetus of it all. But I've heard that it's some pagan thing where they would bring trees in on like some Odin day, in honor of some pagan thing, right? They bring in a tree and like worship it or use it as some sort of worship pole, like an Ashir pole kind of thing in Scandinavian German countries. I don't know the details, to be quite honest. I don't think a lot of us do because the pagan traditions are not well recorded because Catholic Church kind of wiped them out. Also, they didn't write very well in those countries, and so these old traditions aren't well preserved. So I think it's kind of hard to say what they would have done. In any case, even if it was an old practice of Odin worshippers or whatever to bring trees in, we aren't doing, when we celebrate Christmas and we bring a tree in, we don't worship the tree. Honestly, the tree's like, I mean, I understand it's iconic of Christmas, but it's not usually super central to anything. Like, it's not central to church service when we go to it. It's not central to most Christmas songs. Now, there are obviously Christmas songs that talk about the Christmas tree, like O Tannenbaum or tons of secular music that have nothing to do with Christianity. But I mean, yeah, those are secular songs. So like, of course, they hang on to something that doesn't seem very Christ-like. But I don't think that means that the tree itself is pagan. And again, to Christians who are super offended by people not liking the Christmas tree, well, I mean, it's not that big of a deal if we don't have a Christmas tree, right? But I also think it's perfectly clean for Christians to celebrate with the Christmas tree because we're not associating it with pagan worship.
Yes, and if you are, clearly there are problems that need to be addressed, but most people don't. So what I would say, there's really little justification to make a fuss about it unless there's something problematic happening, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yep. And maybe if we were back in the 700s or whatever, right? And so we just replaced this old Nordic tradition with the Christian tradition, and it's causing people to remember their old Odin worship when they bring the tree in. Well, then maybe you don't do the tree thing. It's
right?
like eating meat. Like, that doesn't really to us in the US. That doesn't apply to us because we don't think that the meat we buy from Target was consecrated to Zeus,
And we're thinking about worshiping Zeus when we eat said $3 beef from Target.
Yes. But perhaps if you're in another country, for example, where meat might be offensive, like India, I would say it might be wise to someone who was raised as Hindu. I'm just making up this example on the spot. It might be wise to avoid eating meat in front of that person simply out of courtesy to not make your brother stumble. But clearly, that's a very specific situation that doesn't apply here. I don't think there are any Thor. I mean, I might be wrong, but there are no Thor worshippers or Odin.
Obviously, yes. On the grand scale, even if there is some random Thor worshipper, it's not even close to the time when it was an actual temptation, and therefore I think it's so separated from the old pagan tradition, if it even comes from a pagan tradition, that we don't. It's not an issue of conscience, really.
Yes. So again, the argument that we're trying to hold to is that it's not worth making an attack or a criticism of people having the Christmas tree or celebrating Christmas on the 25th because Christ defeated Thor, as Saint Boniface chopped down and built a nice church out of that wood, a lot of wood, and also over the sun because who worships the sun? I mean, okay. I should be careful with that.
What's his face? Blind singer. What's his? I'm forgetting. Never mind. I'm not even gonna make the joke. That blind black guy. I'm totally forgetting his name. Stevie Wonder. Didn't he look at the sun too long? Isn't that how he got blind? Whatever.
What?
Okay. Never mind.
Okay. Most people don't do that, so we don't associate Christmas or Christ with that. I would say that actually they lost. And they have been replaced with something better. Do you need to celebrate it? No. But do you need to criticize someone who does it? No, you don't. You don't need to. I don't think it's justified to make a fuss about it.
So we've walked from the actual like early Christian pre-300s that there was this tradition of celebrating Easter and kind of Christmas. We walked to the official first Christmas, that we know of, recorded state-sanctioned Christmas, which was from Constantine in the 300s. Then we walked to the Imperator, whatever his face was, Aurelian. I guess that's pre-Constantine.
Right.
But trying to replace, essentially trying to put some other celebration that sounds like it might have been attacking Christmas directly.
Yes.
Or at least replacing Saturnalia or something like that.
Right.
That
trying to tame it down, yes.
And then we walked to the 700s, where some Boniface guy cuts down some Thor tree, and somehow that's related to Christmas. Now, there's a lot of time between the 700s and Puritan England, which we talked about at the beginning of the episode. There had been this, at least in England, and I think in Germany too, there was a tradition, I don't know about France, but it's a tradition in Europe of essentially Saturnalia during Christmas. But I think it was kind of relatively recent that had spawned. I could be wrong, but I think that wasn't the consistent way Christmas was celebrated for a while in Europe. It was just becoming a fad when the Puritans were also becoming a thing, and so the Puritans didn't like that fad, and therefore they reacted against it. Do you know do you know the history between 700 and 1600 or whatever, when the Puritans would have been a thing?
From my understanding, it started to make a comeback after the Reformation. I have not, could be mistaken, I have not found anything before then that's descriptive, or anyone complaining about it being possibly some random town in Germany or France was getting parties out of control. But something that was common, that was after the Reformation, like what's common enough for the Puritans to complain about it. So
was that
before that,
like homeless people going around and like beating houses, doors down, and stealing bread and other things like that?
Yes.
That's the kind of thing that was happening. So there was like rioting on Christmases, but again, like you said, it was after Reformation. I feel like it was like early modern period that was happening, because to my understanding, Christmas was never a very big holiday until Luther
started making a big deal out of it, and he's the one who actually started getting the Christmas trees out to everybody. So yeah.
Germany. Oh well. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with it. But yeah, Easter was always the big Christian holiday, not Christmas.
Right. For most of church history. In fact, before I forget, it's pretty funny. The historians, they're finally catching up 2,000 years later to the Easter controversy, in which the church has split in when we should celebrate Christmas. So
what do you mean they're catching up?
That they finally come to that schism.
In the Nestorian church?
Yeah, like
there are divisions in the Nestorian church.
Yes,
an obscure church and they're arguing over the dating of Easter.
Yes.
Oh my gosh!
Finally, almost 2,000 years later. Yes. So anyway, just a fun fact, and was going to say for Luther. Yes, before I forget, because I just mentioned his name. He started to explain what you were trying to say. He's associated the pine tree, with the greenness, and also how that represents birth and life. And he started getting those trees out into all of Germany.
He must have had a Christmas tree farm or someplace. Investment to pay off. Okay.
He's got to pay for the books.
So we've talked about the history of Christmas, and then leading up to today, of course, and the 1870s, actually, I should spring off. So there's a big tradition in New England not to celebrate Christmas, to intentionally recognize it. Obviously, it's a day on the calendar, but to not celebrate it, like as in, like, don't celebrate actively, and to work on that day, do all this stuff in the day, because they did not like the insane celebrations that sometimes happened in Europe, especially around their time. And that continued to be the general tradition in New England, which is essentially the tradition of the United States, because New England had influence on the rest of the United States, until the Civil War era. And post-Civil War, some say that soldiers that came from the North were influenced by like the people out in the boonies who celebrated Christmas, because they were far away from the church's influence, and soldiers wanted reasons to celebrate because they were on campaign and they wanted excuses not to fight at certain points. And so Christmas became a bigger deal, and so after soldiers came home, Christmas inadvertently, however it happened, became a much bigger deal. New England finally decided it was fine to celebrate, and so in 1870 it was made an official holiday in the United States. So pretty quick turnaround, because again, supposedly the stories say that pre-1870 it was looked down upon, it was frowned upon to celebrate Christmas in America as a whole, especially in New England. And by 1870 it was embraced as a federal holiday. New England was perfectly supportive of it, and ever since then Christmas has become bigger and bigger. The influence of the Germans, who obviously have some weird Christmas love too, they filled out a big portion of the United States, especially in the Midwest. Scandinavians also, Swedish and Norwegians here in Minnesota and stuff, imported all the other weird Christian traditions we have, like associating Saint Nick with Christmas. It's kind of odd, especially the like big red-nosed Santa Claus that we've got with the big red coat and the presents and the reindeer and sled. That's all from Scandinavia and Denmark and upper northern Germany. So all that type of weird stuff that you think of as that Christmas haters usually accuse Christmas of being some weird pagan thing, where Santa's like God. Santa, do you mean Satan? Like you switch out the end?
Yes, yeah. In Russia, he's known as Father Frost, which was from Winter Man, from also similar to Scandinavian traditions back in the day, paganism.
Pre-Christian.
Yeah, in which he was the announcer of winter.
Meaning, clearly, I think Santa, the character, is really some weird pagan thing, but they now pretend he's Saint Nick. But we obviously do not associate Santa Claus with some pagan god. We don't do that. So I think it's perfectly clean to have Santa Claus. Now, again, you can celebrate Christmas however you want. So I don't think you're disobeying God to remove Santa. My family particularly doesn't put an emphasis on Santa at all, because obviously he's fake. It's a lie. Most kids are extremely upset when they learn that Santa's not real, because it's a lie. We're all perpetuating a lie. So I'm not a big on Santa. Plus the fact it's totally distracting from Christ. So like, I'm not thinking Santa's the Antichrist, but it's I think it's a destructive tradition. So I'm not very pro Santa, but I'm not like, he's unclean. And same goes for the Christmas tree. My family has a Christmas tree, but some people get like too into it. Like it does become some like weird idol, but I don't think it's because it was an old pagan thing. I think it's because they've lost the reason for the holiday, the reason for the season, right? The reason for the season is now like giving and the presents and just general cheer and coziness and some like callback to traditions and olden days, as opposed to celebrating the coming of the Savior, right? But again, you don't even need to celebrate Christmas. But I think because we do, it's in the culture, I think it's a good excuse to celebrate and recognize the time that Jesus came. So I think Christmas is a good tradition. I think that we are free to do it. And I think it really comes down to Christian liberty. That is, if it's not unclean, we are able to do it. Why would we not do it when it's supposed to be celebrating Christ? Which it certainly can be. Nobody's stopping you from making it celebrating Christ. And everybody knows. I mean, if you have children in the United States, you're not going to be able to shield them from the fact that people celebrate Christmas. Jehovah's Witnesses cannot shield their kids from the fact that people celebrate birthdays, celebrate Christmas. So they have to come up with some weird, like, anti-Christmas propaganda. Why not? I mean, I understand why they don't, and they're a cult, so I'm not going to make any excuses for them. But Christians who are influenced by the same line of thinking that Jehovah's Witnesses are, why not take the opportunity that obviously everybody knows that Christmas is happening. Kids know it. All the commercials are talking about it. People are expecting gifts and all this. Why not make it it's a perfect opportunity to celebrate the actual coming of Christ, which is obviously a good thing to share the gospel with your children, to just remember it for yourself. I mean, it's perfectly great. I'm perfectly great with Christmas.
Yes. You might have to crack some whips, for example, if your kids are more excited about the gifts than the actual birth. So you know.
It's going to be really hard to get your kids not more excited about the gifts than regular Christmas, but what are you going to do? I think it is honestly an impossible standard to think that your kids are going to be more excited about Christmas, that Jesus came, than about the gifts you're giving them. Kids are pagan. What can we say? You pray for your kids that they come to Christ, but when they're young, they're probably pagan, or they're a little, baby Christian, literally or figuratively, and so their priorities are going to be out of whack. I think that you can emphasize that for you as a parent, the biggest thing is not the gifts that you receive, and therefore you exemplify grace and self-control and honor for the Lord in what you do. And of course, you want to snuff out greed and like other things that can pop up from the kids when they receive gifts and all that type of stuff. But I think it's kind of a hopeless pursuit to try to get the kids more excited about hearing, Luke 1-3, then the new RC car they're gonna get, or whatever it is.
Well, I was pretty excited when I heard about the animals. When it came to anyway. Sorry. Let's not go back to that. I wanted to mention before, because I'm gonna forget later, about Saint Nick. There actually was a guy who lived in the 300s and was there at Nicaea.
Oh, when the first Christmas happened. It's all true.
Yeah, except it was in the desert and there was no snow and there was a bunch of...
Well, at least he had reindeer, right?
If by reindeer you mean camels.
Camels
and donkeys.
In Byzantium.
And donkeys. They donkeys, okay. We're going to substitute the sleigh with maybe some cart and some donkeys.
He's got presents, right, though?
He has sackcloth for poor people that he made and is giving them. So I guess those are gifts, He's giving it for free, so those are gifts.
I mean, the tradition that I always hear around St. Nick, I don't know that he actually did this. I feel like it's just an excuse. But maybe he did. I don't know my details too much.
Uh-huh.
The tradition is that on Christmas, he would put snacks in some kids' socks that they had sitting out to dry. But somehow that doesn't click with me, because I don't know that they were wearing socks in like the 300s in Asia Minor. So why would he be doing that? And what kind of creep does that? So that's the tradition of why we say that Santa Claus is Saint Nick. But what? I don't think he did that. But Saint Nick's famous. Maybe you want to give his famous story.
Yes. He did give. He was a generous person. That's what he did. He did charity. So, and then there's the story about him leaving stuff in socks. Again, no one. I'm even thinking, did Norse people wear socks? I actually want to say no. I would say they would just worn boots. Someone, you can correct me on that. But I'm willing to say that even Scandinavians in the cold would not have worn socks. Like socks were not common.
He probably didn't do that whole thing.
Right. Especially in Turkey, where it's very hot all year round.
And
except
children,
in the mountains.
They don't give children any nice things, let alone socks. Anyways, okay. But he is a famous saint for other reasons. Like, we should know him
for this,
right?
Yes. When he was at Nicaea, he got a little bit grumpy when Arius, the person who propagated Arianism, they believed that Jesus is not equal to God, but is a creation of God, similar to what Jehovah's Witnesses and possibly Mormons would say, right? Mm-hmm. That he is beneath God. God, fine line, creation. Jesus is here with all creation. That's what Arians believe. So he's exalted, but not equal to God. Anyway, Saint Nick, as nice of a man he was with the kids and everything, giving them socks or putting stuff in their socks and whatnot.
Cherry red nose, and he was really big and fat
and bald.
Was he bald?
Yeah. Oh. At least in I can see.
Maybe that's where he wears the red cap
to cover the baldness. We're getting too sidetracked.
Yes, it is. Okay.
At the council, he got so angry, so pissed of stuff that Arius was saying that he got up and punched him right on the face. That's
nice. And that's why to this day Jehovah's Witnesses hate Christmas, because Santa Claus punched their idol in the face. I don't think they're not really Arian fans. Are they Arius fans? I don't know. I don't know what they think about church history. I'm pretty sure they just make it up as they go. Yeah. But that's why he's famous. That's truly a very funny moment in church. I mean, to me at least. So if you want to venerate Santa Claus, Saint Nick, maybe we should get the real guy in there instead of the weird magic man who doesn't give any credit to Christ and just gives you presents and eats milk and cookies. He doesn't do any of that.
He goes around punching Arians.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you can tell the kids, if you're not good this year, Santa Claus might come and punch you. Isn't that would get way sidetracked. There's an old, also pagan German tradition of Belschnickel, who's like Santa Claus's little demon helper who comes before him.
Oh yeah, Krampus.
Krampus, yeah. And
I learned that in German class. Oh, if you go to Bavaria, my goodness, they have a parade of Krampus, who has the scariest Krampus costume. So it's just hundreds of people dressed up in demons with gigantic horns. They look like goats, like furry beasts that walk in two legs. Have arms and whatnot. They have chains. They have a lot of chains, so they make a lot of sound. And then they drag the kids away in a bag. If Santa Claus, Saint Nick, doesn't come in and give them presents. So you're going to be eaten alive, or
you get candy.
Yeah.
Nice. So instead of the coal, which is kind of valuable. It's kind of a valuable gift for Santa Claus to be giving naughty kids. Instead, it's the demon guy drags you away. So, once again, I mean, it is kind of creepy. I don't know about that kind of tradition in Germany, honestly, because it's kind of like demonic, isn't that?
Straight up.
Probably they're not really associating it with some pagan worship, so it's probably okay, but that does seem a little weird. But like I said,
unnecessary.
I'm not really a big fan of Santa Claus here either. But again, I think that you can celebrate a lot of things in Christianity while being clean and not a pagan, even if it has some weird pagan roots. You're not attempting to worship God via having a picture of Santa Claus on a mug, right? So unlike incorporating weird pagan practices into Christ worship in the church, just having it as part of your celebration and you're not worshiping the God and doing it, I don't think is a big deal. And therefore, what should our approach to Christmas be, Sebastian, when we do it personally? Like, so if we lead a family that celebrates Christmas or celebrate it with our families ourselves, or when somebody confronts us with the question, is Christmas pagan, whatever, like what's our recommendation for people to do with Christmas? How do we approach it?
With a sound mind. With the reasons
do it good. That's our recommendation. Do it good.
Yes. Let me finish. With a sound mind, because people can get emotional over this, and I understand sometimes you see a lot of the not marketing, consumerism that there's behind Christmas. So I see that as two separate issues. They have an issue with the attitude of consumerism towards Christmas rather than Christmas itself. I would say. I would say rarely is it the actual holiday that people dislike. They dislike how commercialized it has become, how it's all about buying stuff and giving stuff to people. And my logic is, that's why I said I would want to be more strict with my family or with people close to me, that if Santa Claus or anything like that distracts you abnormally from Jesus, I would want to tone it down. That would be on my level. But as we went over today, the things that we do for Christmas, they like Santa Claus or the tree. Suppose you could tie it back to pagan origins. But no one worships Thor, nor Father Frost, nor Winter. No, we don't have libations outside of our house in winter, for the winter gods. We worship Christ. We remember him. And I think it's a perfectly beautiful thing to have a moment in the year. We should be doing on a regular basis. But if you want to set up special time to remember the birth of Christ, who was the light of the world and came to take our sins on our behalf, on him who didn't deserve to die, and relieved us of that debt with God, I think it's a perfect opportunity to set that time aside. And primarily, I would say, given how common Christmas is in our culture, it's actually pretty easy to sneak in. Obviously not maliciously, but sneak in, like strategically, into a conversation with someone who might be a coworker, a friend. If you don't know they're a Christian, you can say, "Oh, you're celebrating the birth of Jesus." I mean, that's what Christmas is, right? So
connect it with a really long monologue that gets into the gospel. It's Christmas tomorrow, the birthplace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who died for the sins of the world, who you need to repent to, otherwise you'll perish in hell. Toodaloo! Have a good Sunday.
That's one way to do it. I'm of a mind of a more slow approach, but you can, if you really want to, if the Lord calls you to do it that way, do it. But I think it's a perfect opportunity during that season, not of Saturnalia, because we don't celebrate Saturn or Jupiter or the sun anymore.
Nor do we celebrate in the ways they did. I think that's also important. Like, as much as we like to poo-poo Puritans, or some people like to poo-poo Puritans as like party poopers, obviously they had legitimate concerns with the insanity that would happen around, like, the weird, uncouth role reversals of, because it wasn't just slaves and masters, which is weird enough, but it was also like wives and husbands, which is like, what a weird, like, that just is, I can see that going very wrong, even if it's just for a temporary time. And then same thing goes for the orgies and the drunkenness and the looting. I mean, obviously all that's terrible, right? So I can totally understand why the Puritans were party poopers on that. So you have to give them credit there. And so when we celebrate Christmas today, there are things that the pagan world, the non-Christian world, do take in excess, right? Like insane greed, and honestly, like idolization of weird things like fruitcake and Christmas trees and like family and things like that shouldn't be the main focus. So there are things we need to watch for their celebration of Christmas as Christians, but we shouldn't deny that it is a holiday associated with Christians, hence the name. And so it's a good opportunity for evangelism to people you wouldn't normally. I also think that, so if somebody comes to you as a Christian and says that we don't celebrate, my family doesn't celebrate Christmas, I don't think you should celebrate Christmas because it's pagan or it's too commercialism or whatever, and we're trying to separate ourselves from the world, I think that is, you should strongly rebuke them, not because it's a sin to not celebrate Christmas, but because they're robbing their family the opportunity to celebrate. And God, we know that God commanded the people of Israel, commanded them to celebrate certain Sabbaths. Now, are we beholden to any of those Sabbaths? No. And I mean, like, Festival of the Weeks and Passover and some other things. But clearly God has in mind that it is necessary for his people, his children, to celebrate multiple times every year. And so because we don't hold the old Jewish Sabbaths, we don't have a lot of excuses to do that kind of thing. But I believe it's ingrained into our being to want to celebrate and worship and fight, laugh, and feast in the glory of God here on earth, let alone in the next life. So if you don't celebrate Christmas, you're missing a obvious and easy opportunity to teach your children, to teach your neighbors, to teach your coworkers, and to celebrate yourself, a way of celebrating in a godly way. It's honoring to God and is actually full of joy. I think it gives your children something great to associate with God. I think it trains yourself to rejoice in God. There's reasons to celebrate, and I think Christmas is too good of an opportunity to pass up. So if you're hating on Christmas because you think some pagan stuff, first of all, our message to you is I don't think it actually is associated with the pagan things that you think it is. Secondly, it's obviously associated to Christ now. So even if it does have pagan origins, strip out the evil of those pagan origins, keep what is good about it. And then 3, we need to celebrate. Let's use the time to celebrate. Don't be a party pooper. Celebrate in a godly, God-fearing, God-honoring, joyous way, because he commands us to love him with all our heart, soul, and strength. So we should love him and rejoice and sing and be glad and be merry, feast here with our brothers and sisters and show the world that it's a joy to be a Christian.
Amen. Let me quote what you said. I found it. It's in Colossians 2. What you said, yeah. So, therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. So,
which goes to show you that whether or not you celebrate those things, you are free to do so or not to do so. So we shouldn't be judging other Christians for celebrating Passover, for example, and also we don't need to celebrate Passover. So you can celebrate Christmas. You don't need to celebrate Christmas. But again, I think it's a great opportunity, and I think it's in the wrong spirit to not do it. Again, it's not a sin. It's just I think it's a great opportunity to celebrate, which is good.
Yes. If you're going to do it, as you have restated over and over again, Michael, do it for the glory of God.
Mm-hmm. With that being said, it's for the glory of God that we do this podcast, and that's why we've found our cause and serve the Lord Jesus Christ. I've been Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right, your left has been
Sebastian, the bookkeeper.
Thanks for listening. If you want to see the rest of our episodes, you can go to foundcause.podbean.com and download them all at your listening pleasure. That's just audio only, though. If you want to see our beautiful faces and this fabulous set we've got going on with just expert lighting and everything else, you can go to youtube.com and find us there. Search up Found Cause. We got plenty of videos out. What is this, episode 79? It's a lot of videos. You can also go to facebook.com/Found Cause. Look us up there. All the videos are up there. Someday we might even be on Gab.com, which is like a Christian altar social media, but you have to pay like $100 to schedule posts and to post videos there. So that's a Facebook and YouTube die. I'm gonna stay in here for the long haul until they really die or they kick us off or something like that. Otherwise, we're on iTunes, Spotify, everywhere else you might find your podcast. So until next time, we talk about something completely different. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.